him. So Ali is also Ali is a graduate student from the same lab from Hopkins University, and the talk he's gonna give is about NeuroGraphMatch, which is very informative title. Yeah, let's just have Ali to the front and present his talk. Okay.
Can everyone hear me? Okay, so this actually dovetails nicely off of Vivek's talk, because I'm also talking about connectomes and graph matching. I'm going to, I think, focus a little bit more on the math and algorithm side of it. So just as a brief overview and introduction to the terminology. So just generally, a graph is a collection of vertices or nodes and edges, and there's a vertex set and an edge set, and it basically just represents things and relationships between things. So this is a small example of what a graph looks like. And then just a few definitions. Adjacency, two vertices are adjacent if there's an edge between them, and an edge and a vertex are known as incident if that vertex is an endpoint to the edge. And how we represent graphs mathematically, we use adjacency matrices. So if we have a vertex set of size n, the adjacency matrix will be an n by n matrix, where the ijth entry is a 1 if there's an edge between vertices I and j, and a 0 otherwise. So in this small example, you can see that vertices A and B have an edge between them, so there is a 1 entry in the AB row column of the adjacency matrix. And for undirected graphs, these adjacency matrices are symmetric, and for directed graphs, they are not symmetric. And a permutation matrix is basically just each entry is a 1 or a 0, and all the rows and columns sum to 1. So the specific problem here is known as the graph matching problem. And essentially, if you're given two graphs with associated adjacency matrices A and B, we want to find an alignment between those two graphs such that we minimize the number of edge disagreements. And formally, as an optimization problem, this is represented as this objective function value subject to these constraints. And this problem is equivalent to the objective function value on the right, just through some algebra. And there is a sister problem known as the quadratic assignment problem. And the graph matching problem is actually, as we see in the objective function value, equivalent just up to a minimization of that objective function value. And this is actually really nice because there's a pretty large amount of literature devoted to solving the quadratic assignment problem. So we can just apply those methods to solving our graph matching problem. And the reason why this is difficult is since the objective function value is quadratic, it's NP hard to find a global optimum. And also the feasible region, which is the set of permutation matrices, is non-convex. And also permutation matrices of size n have n factorial possible solutions. So as you can imagine, that's an extremely large number. So our lab has developed this fast approximate quadratic assignment algorithm, which is state of the art in terms of efficiency and accuracy. And it's able to approximate solutions for both the QAP and graph matching problem by finding a local optimum. And the way it does this is by relaxing the feasible region from the set of all permutation matrices to its convex hull, which is the set of doubly stochastic matrices. So essentially all that means is that instead of each entry being restricted to the value of 1 or 0, it can be any value between 0 or 1. And that set of matrices is convex. So applying this to neuroscience with connectomes, so this is an example of doing so. This is the Drosophila mushroom body connectome. And we basically used embedding, like how Vivek had showed, to reduce the dimensionality to 2 dimensions. The top row shows the correctly matched vertices, and the bottom row shows incorrectly matched vertices. And we see that there's about an 80% match accuracy. And even for the nodes that are incorrectly matched, they are matched to the right cell type. So essentially, this is important for manually labeling these neurons in the brain is like very laborious and takes a long time. So the idea is that we can use the graph matching algorithm to just automatically do this. So if anyone wants to use FAQ, it's available in open source packages, SciPy and graspologic. You could just use these command prompts to load it in. So thank you to everyone in the NeuroData Lab and the collaborators at Microsoft Graspologic and the SciPy contributors that helped me merge this code into SciPy. So if anyone has any questions.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. Thanks, Ali, for the introduction of this interesting algorithm for graph matching. Yeah, let me ask a question that that I have while you present. Can you go back a few slides to the for the optimization objective?
Yeah. This one?
Yeah. So just curious, probably more technical or mathematical part. So what's the P? What's the feasible region here for the P? I know. I mean, before you relax just stochastic matrix, it has to be integers. Is there other like restriction to it that make it more? Because if you don't have the feasible region, it seems to be a simpler problem to solve. So the non-convexity or all this hard part add to the algorithm might come from the feasible region. That's my understanding. So, I mean, if it's just integer programming, maybe you can relax it to non-integer a little bit, but any other feasible region constraint that make it harder?
Yeah, so the idea is essentially, since we want to preserve A and B, we have to have this permutation matrix because all the permutation matrix does is shuffle the rows and columns of our two adjacency matrices. So it preserves the overall connectivity. So if we don't have a permutation matrix, then we would essentially be solving a different problem. So the way that the algorithm works with relaxing to the doubly stochastic matrices is we just solve for the optimum in that region, and then we project the doubly stochastic matrix to the set of permutation matrices using a linear assignment problem algorithm.
So maybe before, yeah, a bit follow up on that. So that's another question I come up with where you present, well you answer that. So why it has to be doubly stochastic? Just out of curiosity, can you just relax it to be continuous that make it easier? Or what's the reason that you add the stochasticity to the model?
So the way that it, so essentially, since the permutation matrix isn't convex, there are points between like two permutation matrices, like the linear combination of them, which aren't themselves a permutation matrix. So if we move, if we use our gradient descent method to move to some point, then we might not land on another permutation matrix.
And the stochasticity want you to kind of perturb locally to land on a desired permutation matrix or the manifold is supposed to be aligned on.
Yes, exactly.
I see. Cool. That's clear. A question from the audience: is the goal of graph matching to measure the similarity between two graphs?
Yes. Well, in a way, essentially the goal is to find the most similar isomorphism of one of the graphs. So yes, the graph matching problem does quantify the similarity between two graphs.
I see. hope that answered the question. I think maybe that can be used as a evaluation metric if they don't really want to find this isomorphic subspace or something. They can probably just use it to measure how similar the two matrices or two graphs are. And then maybe presumably you can also try to map the two graphs down to the same isomorphic subspace using the permutation matrix supposedly, and that could also provide some hope for further downstream analysis for that purpose. So yeah, I think this is very interesting. Yeah, I think that hopefully that answers our question. So another quick thing I want to maybe discuss briefly with you is so what happens, is that possible to solve a matching without alignment of the node? Like when the two nodes are, when probably one has a bit more more nodes with some additional links, and I mean, basically when two graphs are not well aligned with each other, which actually usually happen in brain connectome. Like when I work with that for my data, I always have misalignment issue. Maybe when you try to collapse voxels as much as possible, you will have less nodes and more presumably aligned graph. But when you have more voxels you want to consider, then the misalignment is a big issue, in which case try to match the graph would be hard. Is that possible to extend the model you propose to that, or it's actually a very trivial problem in your case by changing some parts of the model?
Yeah, so having the vertex sets of the two adjacency matrices being the same size isn't necessarily a requirement, because we have something called padding. So we essentially just add some isolated vertices to the smaller vertex set. And there are additional kind of procedures that we have that allows us to get kind of the best induced subgraph out of the adjacency matrix with the larger vertex set.
I see. Okay. Another quick question, actually, I'm curious. Thanks for answering that one.
No problem.
Is in many cases, the graph in the brain can be huge. You might have thousands or even millions. I'm not sure, maybe that's not very interesting area to work with, but it means your ABP gonna be huge, which will probably hinder the application of an algorithm for full matrix like this. But I would assume there's some way to solve that, because ABP are all sparse matrices. Is that possible to utilize the sparsity or some structure in the model for scaling the matrix or scaling the algorithm?
So we have tried to kind of convert this to a sparse matrix problem, but the main issue is that the doubly stochastic matrix is usually not sparse. There are usually like very small values that aren't equal to 0. And if we say like threshold that to being a sparse matrix, the process of thresholding actually also takes a very long time. So we haven't really found that using sparse matrices helps too much.
I see, which means
current. Oh, I was just going to add one other approach that some people have tried, is sort of making it like a hierarchical approach, where you maybe sort of contract the graph at some level, match like super nodes, and then sort of recursively do that. So that's one approach that's been proposed.
Yeah. Okay, cool. That sounds like also a very reasonable option people would come up with when they have very large data or large number of nodes. Great. Yeah, I think that sounds great. It's a very interesting topic. I've also thought about similar problems and also come into similar computational bottlenecks during developing models. So thank you for answering those questions. Oh, actually, there's a quick question maybe from the audience. What is the advantage of graph matching compared to calculating simply the degree of overlap between the networks?
So it's kind of hard to quantify the degree of overlap between networks if we don't have a labeling of the nodes. So like the trivial way of finding overlap between networks would just be subtracting them and finding kind of the sum of all entries, like subtracting two adjacency matrices. And if we haven't used the graph matching problem to align and label our nodes, then that difference sum wouldn't really be very informative. So kind of the whole idea is that we first do graph matching, and then we kind of have a way to quantify similarities between two networks.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And also I feel like just simply the degree of, oh, okay, so I probably misunderstand. But yeah, I think that makes sense, and hopefully that answered the question from the audience. We should move on to the last talk in this session. Thanks, Ali, again for giving a great talk and introduce such an interesting model, problem and method. And let's move on to the last talk for the session.